If you feel that you lack discipline and want to get more of it, how do you? Do you have enough discipline to undertake the task of learning to be more disciplined? Is discipline something that you always have at your disposal but somehow lack the necessary skill to exercise? Can we only think of discipline as a type of willpower, or could we think of it as something that temporarily carries us into action despite our own objections? In this video, I'll be exploring the concept of discipline, as well as try to determine what it is we're talking about when we talk about discipline. To illustrate my point, I'll be starting this off with a short story. Once upon a time, a young man heard that the Buddha would soon be passing through his village. He heard that this teacher was in possession of certain truths that would help him overcome his suffering. Eventually, the Buddha arrived, and the young man had a chance to speak with him. "Oh Buddha, please share with me your truths," he said, "for I wish to overcome the hardships of life." Tears began to flow. "I no longer wish to suffer." The Buddha looked upon him with sincerity and compassion. He smiled and raised his hand, his index finger extended. "Dukkha," he said, "life is suffering." He extended another finger. "The cause of this suffering is desire." The young man was enthralled by the Buddha's words. So he began, "In order to stop suffering, I just need to stop desiring?" The Buddha was silent, and the young man decided to take it as a yes. Later that evening, and while buzzing with excitement, he decided to follow the Buddha's words to the letter and dispel of any and all desires he might have. The Buddha would be in the village for a few weeks, and so he decided that just before the Buddha left, he would demonstrate to him how much he had learned. As the week progressed, the man rid himself of one desire after another. He watched himself carefully, ensuring that none of his thoughts had even so much as a speck of desire on them. He didn't allow himself to leave home, and even stopped eating entirely. Eventually, the day of the Buddha's departure came. The young man ran up to him in excitement to demonstrate his complete desirelessness. "Your teachings had a big impact on me," he said. "This past week, I spent all my time doing away with my desires. I stopped eating, and I was very careful not to allow myself to desire anything." "So," said the Buddha. There was a sharpness in the tone of his voice. "You have done away with your desire?" "Yes," said the young man, growing all the more excited. He began to contemplate how special it would be if the Buddha were to give him his blessing. "Yes, teacher," he continued, "I have done away with all desires. I was very careful not to allow even a single one." The Buddha sat back and paused. He looked straight at the young man and smiled. "Tell me," he began, "how did you manage to rid yourself of your desire to be without desire?" The young man turned cold as he realized exactly what the Buddha was asking him. All his notions of progress and development suddenly shattered. He realized that his desire to remove desire was itself a desire, and that all his feelings of progress were an illusion. He was in exactly the same place as when he last spoke to the Buddha. Same desire, same problem. The young man was distraught and frustrated, desperate to find some redemption for his efforts. "So," he said, "what I need to do now is rid myself of the desire to have no desires?" The Buddha looked at him, into him, piercing eyes that seemed to focus in on the deepest depths of the man's psyche. A wry, playful smile appeared at the corner of the Buddha's mouth. The man was desperate for an answer, and so repeated the question. "How do I rid myself of the desire to have no desires?" he asked. His voice was shaking. The slight smile still sitting firmly at the corner of his mouth said, "Tell me, why do you want to know how to do away with your desire to be without desire?" There was a moment of silence before, at last, the young man and the Buddha both burst into laughter. I'd like you to try to imagine the following scenario. You walk into your room and see a book on your bed. It's university work that needs to be studied for your upcoming exam. This book, however, is lackluster and dull, offering no immediate benefits for the focus it demands. Reading it is, for you, an uncomfortable experience, and one that you must subject yourself to if you wish to be ready for the assessment. Notice how you feel a sense of discomfort and resistance the moment the book becomes a focus point of your attention. This resistance you feel is very subtle. We'll often not acknowledge it is there, but rather work around it. This leads to procrastination, and the longer the responsibility is ignored, the more restless and uncomfortable we generally feel. We often don't see that we're acting in relation to the obstacle we must overcome, and so we feel almost pushed around by it. We keep busy with why, because then at least we don't feel we're wasting time. But you know that why can wait, and it's actually X which demands your true attention. You stand in the doorway looking at the book on your bed. You'll notice that the more time we spend thinking about which course of action to take, the more opportunities we give ourselves to think of reasons as to why we should begin the work at a later time. In this way, the longer we wait, it's likely we feel there is even more resistance to overcome. But the fear of the task at hand can only last so long, and now the assessment is tomorrow, and you haven't touched the book. Now the fear you feel at the thought of failing is immense, so immense that the fear of the discomfort of reading the book pales in comparison. This is usually when many people overcome the procrastination and get to work. The work is often not as bad as we anticipated it would be, nor does it take as long as we imagined it would. As it does for me, what I'm describing to you might sound very familiar. And so there you stand. You're in your room, you spot the book on your bed, the resistance sneaks in. At this point, it's quite useful to frame the situation into a decision. I can choose to engage in what I know I should do, to sit down and start reading, or I can choose to do something else instead. This framework of choice lets us simplify the situation, and it's in this moment that we must decide which path we'll be going down. Let's imagine the classic obsessed with self-help kind of person, the one who gets a notification every time a new TED video is uploaded. He is constantly searching for a better pattern of behavior, but the temporary satisfaction of the search prevents him from using what he has learned to face the terror of life with courage. Instead, he procrastinates and calls it preparation. His blade is very sharp, but it never gets used, and he finds temporary satisfaction in the idea of self-improvement, and so settles into the thought pattern of, well, I'm taking the effort to improve myself, and so becomes the type of person who substitutes the discomfort of real success for the illusory satisfaction of reading a book about how to be successful. Or let's imagine someone who spends almost all of their free time watching motivational videos. What this person is searching for might seem like motivation, but it's actually discipline. It's quite commonly said that when you have discipline, you don't need motivation. This is true, but only because discipline is motivated behavior sustained and integrated into a personality. To be motivated is to glimpse temporarily a sense of meaning, but to be disciplined is to be aware of that meaning consistently. And so motivation is discipline, discipline in minute amounts. A motivated moment is a moment in which you temporarily gain access to the willpower which already exists within you. Discipline is commonly thought of as the ability to exercise your will in order to overcome any internal resistance you might feel. We tell ourselves to do something, but feel paralyzed by our fear. And it's this underlying fear which gives rise to thoughts, reasons, and suggestions within your own mind, which attempt to deter and redirect your actions away from the task at hand. A part of yourself wants to protect you from the threat and discomfort that the task seems to guarantee. True discipline is not so much the forcing through these negative thoughts and emotive associations, but rather to see through the fear and then to just drop all the thoughts. And so to have that for a moment, to be able to drop all the illusions of resistance that you think there are, and then to just act. That is discipline, but this is not an external force that you lack and need to acquire. It's the opposite. It's the realization that the only obstacle to overcome is the notion that there is anything to overcome. And paradoxically, realizing this is one of the first steps to overcoming the resistance. To act in a disciplined manner is therefore simply to act, and to see that you don't lack this imaginary panacea force known as discipline. Discipline is a concept, an idea, and you cannot lack a concept. You already have all the willpower you need to overcome the obstacle, or at least to engage with it, because there is no real obstacle. And the resistance itself cannot be found when you look for it, because it exists only in your mind. And so, by realizing that you don't need discipline, and that you don't lack it, you suddenly see that there is nothing to overcome. And so you can simply sit down, pick up the book, and start reading. The discipline came to you because you stopped insisting that you needed it. This is discipline, not some force of will which we ourselves drive into existence through some sort of mental focus, but rather an ability to overcome the obstacle by giving the notion of discipline away. You only needed discipline because you thought that you lacked it. You were searching for an imaginary cure to an imaginary illness of your own creation. In the story from the beginning of this video, the young man's final question to the Buddha, how do I rid myself of the desire to have no desires, is itself a question motivated by desire, which is what makes the Buddha's answer of why do you want to know so appropriate, and also explains the laughter at the end. The young man realizes that there's nothing he can do to stop desiring. Every attempt to do away with desire is motivated by desire. And so the problem is created by the young man's own insistence that there is something that he lacks. He's convinced himself that if he only knew how to exercise this difficult-to-grab state of desirelessness, then he would be able to achieve bliss. When the Buddha points this out to him, he realizes that he is creating the problem by insisting that there is some higher knowledge or method which he doesn't yet know. But the Buddha shows him that what he lacks is the ability to see that he lacks nothing. This paradoxical idea might be better understood if I explain it in terms of discipline. You see task X, which you do not want to do. You then think that if only you had more discipline, then I would be able to complete this task. But now discipline has become the scapegoat. It is no longer simply an unwillingness to complete the task, but instead the problem has become a lack of discipline. And so you think, okay, if I can just get more disciplined, then I'll be able to overcome this obstacle. And so you start reading books on discipline and watching videos on discipline. But then you see that to act out in discipline means to do something that you don't want to do, to fight through the resistance, which understandably seems like an uncomfortable thing to do, and now the discomfort you associated with overcoming the task is experienced as the discomfort of a lack of discipline. And because exercising discipline is difficult and uncomfortable, you begin to search for tips and tricks on how to get around discipline, how to overcome the discomfort of discipline. Maybe you even go onto YouTube and watch a video about a counterintuitive approach to discipline, because perhaps that will finally allow you to overcome this discomfort and resistance that you feel, and to somehow jippo the system. But if you look carefully, you'll see that you're doing the same thing you've always been doing, which is trying to overcome the resistance you feel through some sort of gimmick or trick or idea or concept. When in reality, the only thing to overcome is the notion that there is something to overcome. The resistance you feel, the thoughts that prevent you from acting, do not need to be overcome. They are irrelevant. There's a pretty popular line by someone I'm a big fan of, Jocko Willink, and it goes, discipline equals freedom. Now, straight off, I want to say that I agree with this. However, I want to explore it a bit. It seems very simple, like there isn't much to misunderstand, but here's the thing. I think many of us read discipline equals freedom as discipline results in freedom. But discipline equals freedom. It is freedom. There is no difference. And so you ask, okay, freedom from what? Well, I would say freedom from the notion that you need anything other than the willpower you already have. And so discipline is freedom from the webs of psychological casuistry that we spin. It's freedom from the notion that you lack something. Freedom from the notion that if I just had more of this, then I'd be able to do the things I don't want to do. Discipline allows us to transcend our own thoughts and to look at the situation through an objective eye, to see that nothing truly holds us back and that there is nothing that we lack in order to do what needs to be done. And so the reason we keep buying another book on how to be more disciplined, or going to the next seminar, or trying to sneak ways around the problem of discipline is because we insist that there is a problem. And not only do we insist that there's a problem, but that this problem can and must be overcome. And so we tie ourselves up in semantic knots, slowly strangled by metaphors and ideas. Discipline equals freedom means both that discipline leads to freedom, but also, and I would argue more importantly, that the very act of discipline is an act of freedom. Freedom from yourself. To act in a way that is unrestricted by your own negative thoughts, associations, and ideas is what I would call serious discipline. To know what must be done, but not to consult your emotions or thoughts as to whether or not you feel completely ready yet. And so that brings me to my last question. Why are you here? Why are you watching this video? Take a moment to think about it if you need to. There is very likely something in your life which you do not like doing. And perhaps you wish you could exercise this will to overcome this terrible thing you don't like doing. Stop looking for the will to do it. You have it already. When you see that you don't need discipline, you get it. And so you say, so this is how I sneak around the resistance. Actually, no, because you still think that there's something to sneak around. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider getting intimate with my subscribe button. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this video. I realize that many people are going to disagree with me, but what's new, right? I feel that I should point out that yes, I have read Steven Pressfield's War of Art, and I would say that I agree with the way he describes resistance as the biggest thing which holds us back. Pressfield takes a very offensive approach towards this resistance. He describes it as a daily battle under the shadow of a larger creative war. If you're interested in reading more about resistance, I highly recommend you check out his book. Fellow human being on the opposite end of the screen, my name is Dylan, this has been Existential Delight, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.